Aqui no Spotify, muitas playlists são criadas através de inteligência artificial. A IA está em todo lugar, mas nem todo IA é igual. Desbloqueie experiências de IA mais inteligentes, fáceis de expandir e personalizadas para sua vida e seus negócios com os computadores Lenovo e processadores Intel Core Ultra, que transformam a sua experiência tecnológica. Acesse lenovo.com/smarter aí. Lenovo, inteligência artificial mais inteligente para todos.
Uma pausa no seu podcast para contar que chegou o novo Peugeot 2008, um carro que impressiona até quem já viu de tudo. Conheça uma experiência de puro prazer em dirigir com acabamento sofisticado e design inconfundível. Descubra como conforto e tecnologia podem elevar o nível da sua experiência de direção. Conheça o novo Peugeot 2008 e deixe a inspiração te guiar.
In the spirit of reconciliation, the Theatre Thoughts podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all traditional custodians of the land on which our episodes are recorded.
These are all issues that are creating pressures on people's disposable income that are impacting on their capacity to attend live events. So this is the new environment that we're working in. And this is not an Australian issue. This is a global issue. The United States is facing, large chunks of, I'd say Great Britain is facing, and we're facing here. So we're in this reconstruction period, but we're not admitting to it. So we're sort of coasting along as business as normal. And we're not thinking about what do we need to do for the future.
You're listening to the Theatre Thoughts podcast, where we dive deep into the world of theatre and celebrate the magic of the stage. I'm your host, Justin Clarke, and I'm here to guide you through insightful conversations, behind-the-scenes stories, and thought-provoking discussions about everything theatre-related. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind you to connect with us on social media. You can follow us on Instagram at TheatreThoughtsAUS and TTPod_official for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and exclusive interviews. You can also find us on TikTok at Theatre Thoughts Australia for even more theatre goodness. And if you'd like to support the podcast and gain access to exclusive content, consider subscribing to our Patreon. So whether you're a seasoned theatregoer or just starting your journey, please sit back, relax, and enjoy this brand new episode of the Theatre Thoughts podcast. Welcome everyone to a very special episode of the Theatre Thoughts podcast. I have two amazing producers on today to talk about the theatre industry and give me their background and their views on what I could only describe as a wealth of experience under both of their belts. So we first of all have a producer, an executive producer who's worked on Australian productions of Mamma Mia, the original Australian tour, We Will Rock You, Miss Saigon, Spamalot, Billy Elliot, Mamma Mia Again, Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap, and was also the international executive producer for the non-English language productions of Billy Elliot and Matilda the Musical. Please welcome Louise Withers. Welcome so much. Thank you for jumping on.
Absolute pleasure.
And we also have another producer who has explored producing globally. He founded New Theatricals, which is a producing group operating across Australia and on Broadway. Shows under New Theatricals include Come From Away, which is a personal favourite, Children of a Lesser God, Rocky, Catch Me If You Can, and Lend Me a Tenner. Rodney Rigby, welcome. Thank you, I should say, for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm very, very excited to have you both on. Thank you for giving me your time and coming on to have a chat. I guess the first thing I'd like to ask is just to get a little bit more info about the two of you. What are like the top things we should know, about Louise and Rodney?
What, besides being crazy to be in the business?
Well, aren't we all?
We're still here. I think that's one of the best things. Rodney and I have both been around for a long time, and someone actually asked me when I was in a presentation recently, and they said, what are you most proud of in your career? And I just said surviving. You know, the industry can be very tough. It can be very difficult. It can be unexpected. It can also be fabulous. So it's all of those things. And to ride the wave of popularity or quieter market times, both either creatively or from an audience spending perspective, it takes some guts to hang in there. And that's what I'm most proud of.
I love that. Rodney, would you echo that?
Yeah, I said to an actor once who just landed her first leading role. I said to her, "It's not, this is fantastic. You got this leading role, but it's not about this one show. It's about a career." And I think that applies to us all. It's a business about having highs and lows. It's about rejection. It's about having to have room for failure, hopefully some success along the way, getting a thicker skin, being able to pick yourself up and being resilient, and being optimistic but realistic at the same time. And never letting the obstacles, as daunting as they may be, getting in the way of that pursuit of finding a great story to share with others.
Yeah, I like that. I like the final thing you said about sharing the story, because I guess at the end of the day, that's what it all comes back to. That we're in this to share stories and put on these massive big shows that hopefully will change people's lives
and give them a good time.
Yes.
Well, isn't that the joy of what we do? I mean, for me, the greatest pleasure of producing is walking into a theatre that is full, standing in the back of the house, knowing that the work on stage is as equal or better than anywhere else in the world, and the theatre is full of paying audience members. That's the best. And when that alchemy happens, it doesn't get any better. And our job is to, facilitate that. And when we achieve it, we can, for 2.5 hours or 100 minutes, as the case may be, we can change people's lives. We can give them new ideas. We can take them out of their existence and give them a new platform, a new, something new to think about. And for me, that's terribly exciting and worthwhile. And the human condition demands and requires that we come to a place to share that sense of community and share storytelling. And we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's something that will continue.
Yeah, exactly. I think I find it fascinating, and it was part of the reason I wanted to get both of you on, is because you have had such, amazing careers and done so much work with so many people. And I've always wondered, from a producer's perspective, exactly what you just said, what does it feel like where you stand and you watch? Because on stage, obviously they're performing, they are the characters, and what's it like from the other side? So it is something I have always wondered.
I think the thing I enjoy, I was trained as a teacher. Many people in the theatre are, but I was trained as a teacher many years ago and I taught high school music there for a couple of years before I managed to escape to the circus. And and I think, ultimately I do enjoy that. I enjoy teaching, I enjoy mentoring, and I enjoy helping other people achieve their goals. That's important to me, especially because I won't go into it, but yes, my performing career had a unfortunate ending at one point, where I literally lost my voice, and so I couldn't be on stage anymore, and so my joy comes from facilitating other people to reach their dreams, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a noble, especially in this industry, everyone needs that champion, and I think it's a very noble thing.
That it feeds the soul.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. And I like that. Feeds the soul. That's a little like sound clip. I'm gonna grab that. That's a good one. I would before I go too much further into yourselves, I'd love to ask you our 1 minute theatre thoughts questions and start picking your brains a little bit in terms of your thoughts on theatre, literally. So it's essentially just a bunch of different questions. It would be like whatever comes off the top of your head first, and we'll see how many we can get through. And then if there's any interesting ones I'd like to delve into, we'll jump back afterwards. All right, the first question is, what has been your favourite production you've seen recently?
Probably the Lehman trilogy stands out in the last couple of years as being something quite brilliant.
Lehman trilogy. Okay, lovely. Louise?
And I'm not saying this because Rodney's on the line. I actually am a huge fan of Come From Away. I think it's a beautiful, heartfelt piece full of love and community and friendship and family and all those things that I love.
Yeah, I totally resonate. I saw it twice in the year in Sydney where it came and then it had to pause and it came back again, and I saw it both times and I was just like, can't get enough of it. You really can't. It's really great. Name someone, who is someone who has inspired you?
Susan Stroman and Des McAnuff, two wonderful Broadway directors, and in the case of Stro, a choreographer.
Okay, lovely. Louise?
Wendy McCarthy, as a great philanthropist and also a great supporter of helping women achieve careers over a very, very long period of time. She sat on many boards and as directors and things. I only had the joy of meeting her twice, a long time ago, when I was being headhunted for a job. But I admired her immensely, and I have always remembered her.
I love that. Is there a dream show you'd love to tackle?
That's the next show that I don't know I'm producing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one, isn't it? Because obviously, as producers, you want to. I guess you're funding the show, yeah. Louise, did you have an answer for that one?
I would love to do a production of La Cage aux Folles.
Oh, lovely.
That it was done in 1985.
Yeah.
Total class and beauty.
I guess the last one, well, I do have two more, but I guess the last one's a bit of a hard one to answer. But the second one I wanted to ask was, do you have a all-time favorite musical or production?
I don't. I have a number of shows that change in the course of time. So it depends where I am in my life, where I am, what decade, and how I'm feeling.
Yeah. I think it's spot on.
Mine is a clear favourite. I'm afraid I am a huge fan of Sweeney Todd.
Oh, lovely! That's a good one. Did you manage to see or listen to the Josh Groban production that's on Broadway?
I haven't.
There it is.
Haven't seen it yet.
Goodness.
That would be interesting. But I have seen many others. I'm a huge fan of George Hearn and of Len Cariou. I was an ASM on the 1987 State Theatre Company of South Australia production. I was in charge of Blood. I thought that was pretty cool. Wow. Yes, I adore that musical, and I would love to produce it one day. It's been done a lot though, so I think it might end up in my head only.
Well, hopefully.
Make sure you get to see it, Louise. It's the Broadway production is just absolutely stunning. It's just stunning.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
And it's almost as exciting standing on the street, waiting to get into the theater, as actually watching the show, because the audience are like so charged up, and it's like, who the hell are these people? These people don't know who Stephen Sondheim is.
Do you think they're going because they're Josh Groban fans and they don't know what they're going to see yet? I mean, they don't know about people being put into pies or what?
It's the alchemy of Josh. It's the alchemy of the casting. I mean, they've cast the show so extraordinarily well with that young man from Stranger Things and
yes.
Ellie Ashley. So it's this incredibly alchemy of casting that 2 hours into the show, the audience is still laughing at these incredible lyrics and these, really funny lyrics that I've sat through many productions of Sweeney Todd. There's no response. It's such a thrilling production. It's just
obviously so well crafted and well directed that they've got every bit of love out of it.
Absolutely, it's stunning. I mean, I thought Annalee Ashley was really. I mean, it was her comic performance is just breathtaking. It's just
okay.
Yeah, go see it.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go. High praise. That's amazing. The last question I did want to ask, I don't know if it's a bit of a tough one because I guess if you answered it, you might give some spoilers away. But the question was, which production would you most want to see come to Australia? And I don't know if you're working on any at the moment, but I mean, I know there's obviously a lot of productions people want to come. But is there any that you particularly have?
Yes, I want Water for Elephants to come to Australia, which is my new show.
There you go.
Opening on Broadway in March. I want that to be a great success on Broadway and come to Australia. That'd be thrilling.
That's why I was like, I'm not sure if it's a tough question because you're probably working on shows. That'd be great. Louise, did you have one?
No, it's in my vault of silence.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Excellent. Oh, goodness. Well, thank you so much for that. I'd love to jump back to some of those answers that you gave. I'd love to jump back, Rodney, to the answer you gave for who is someone who's inspired you, and you were talking about the Broadway directors. So what was it about them that particularly resonated for you?
I think Des is one of the most influential directors on Broadway. I mean, he brought rock music to Broadway. He brought country music with Big River to Broadway and made it acceptable. Then with his production of Tommy, which is currently being just finished, it's in revival at the moment. Just had a huge success at the Goodman in Chicago. He legitimized rock music on Broadway in the 90s with Tommy, and so it enabled that to happen. And then of course Jersey Boys, that he legitimized jukebox musicals, because whilst Mamma Mia opened on Broadway before Jersey Boys,
right,
it was Jersey Boys that sort of legitimized for the Americans the jukebox musical form. The other genius of Des was transitions in the musical form. He really was he's a master of transitions from one scene to another. So he's very cinematographic. His technique of very cinema approach from just one scene to another. Stroh, of course, is been nominated for more Tony. I think she's up for just as many Tony Awards as Bob Fosse. But when you look at her volume of work choreographically and in terms of a director, although New York unfortunately didn't work last season.
Oh wow!
Some of her staging and choreographic work was just unbelievably breathtaking. So as a choreographer and as a director, I mean, her stuff is just extraordinary. And you think about her work in Contact, just beautiful ballet work that that really helped as an art form. And then her comedic work, as a director on The Producers. So, she's her wealth of work from directing plays and comedy to her work with Mel Brooks on The Producers and Young Frankenstein to her choreographic. I mean, that sort of influence is just extraordinary. And of course, she's a woman, and being a woman working on Broadway is hard enough. Being a woman working as a director and a choreographer, just multiply that by any multiple you like. It's very challenging and very hard.
But also, Rodney, at the time that she really came to the fore, that's a long time ago. So she was cutting ground. I mean, it's not like today, starting to forge that position now. She was doing it years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, she had, at one point she had 3 shows on Broadway running at one time. I mean, a trailblazer. Right through, right through from the 1990s. So it's an extraordinary contribution she's made to the American music, to the American theatre, that has really influenced musical theatre worldwide.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow. This is another thing I just love about the podcast is I didn't know that. I'm going to be honest, did not know that. So that's another thing to add into my bank of knowledge. That's incredible. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Louise, same question for you. So the person you said for who's someone that inspired you, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
I think Wendy, but also, I mean, if I'm going to do theatre discussion as a direct theatre discussion, I mean, I've had many people teach me a lot of things in the theatre. So I would, the people that stand out for me personally, there was a gentleman called Ian Fraser who taught me an awful lot about the industrial landscape and taught me to have a thick skin. A gentleman by the name of Mort Clarke, who was a technical director of the old days in 1990s and before, who just never settled for anything less than perfect. And then a gentleman called Rob Bailey, who I worked with for 3 years directly, but many years prior to that when I was with Cameron McIntosh in the area of marketing and design. And he taught me a lot about look for the mismatch, which in design and marketing is one thing, but it's such a good thing to look for every day in every area of the theatre. You look for the mismatch. Never assume anything is correct, and look to make sure it's correct. Assume it's wrong. So, I guess I've forged my career by covering a lot of ground in a lot of areas. I've done industrial, I've done marketing, I've done on stage, I've done off stage. And really it's that broad experience that has benefited me, because you can actually talk the talk with anybody. You may not be a specialist in it all, far from it, but you can talk the talk, and you can't have anyone pull your wool over your eyes. So my inspirations come from a variety of places, and I do get inspired every day that I look at a mate like Rodney and, we're still here. And that inspires me. It inspires me that I keep going until we all stop at the same time.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for answering those. That was really enlightening to hear.
Aqui no Spotify, muitas playlists são criadas através de inteligência artificial. A IA está em todo lugar, mas nem todo IA é igual. Desbloqueie experiências de IA mais inteligentes, fáceis de expandir e personalizadas para sua vida e seus negócios com os computadores Lenovo e processadores Intel Core Ultra, que transformam a sua experiência tecnológica. Acesse lenovo.com/smarter aí. Lenovo, inteligência artificial mais inteligente para todos.
So I guess let's turn it back now to talking a little bit more about the main reason I was fascinated to get you on. Like I said, I saw you guys talk at the business night in Sydney, and you gave such depth of conversation and passion as well about what you think the Australian theatre scene needs, and also the steps that we need to take as an industry, both from a theatrical level, but also at the government stage as well. So I'd love to know your thoughts on what is it that you see for the future of the Australian theatre scene?
Do you want to go first, Rodney?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think we're at a very challenging point in time right now. We're obviously in this post-COVID reconstruction, at a time when no one's admitting we're in a reconstruction period. None of us know what sort of period we're actually in, but we know our audiences have not returned in full. Audiences are down. Some have not come back. Consumer behavior has radically changed in terms of buying patterns, and there is competition afoot. Streaming services are our major competition at the moment. We're facing also the economy is our competition. High interest rates, mortgage payments, cost of living pressures. These are all issues that are creating pressures on people's disposable income that are impacting on their capacity to attend live events. So this is the new environment that we're working in. And this is not an Australian issue. This is a global issue. The United States is facing, large chunks of, I'd say Great Britain is facing, and we're facing here. So we're in this reconstruction period, but we're not admitting to it. So we're sort of coasting along as business as normal. And so we're not thinking about what do we need to do for the future.
Right.
So the first thing that we need to do in Australia is that, from a commercial, and I'll speak from a commercial sector, is the federal government needs to have investment incentive. It is absolutely ridiculous and unacceptable. The commercial theatre industry, there is no investment incentives whatsoever. The film industry has had it for decades. There is incentives across the United States. There's investment incentives in Great Britain. We live in a globalized economy. Most of our shows in Australia are financed in part, a large part, from foreign investment. We are not an attractive investment market. We have no investment culture in this country to encourage Australians to invest in shows here. Louise and I are not corporate producers. We are individual producers. We are not backed by hedge funds or owned by multinational companies. So for us, when we raise money, raising money from anything from, $500,000 up to $15 or $18 million or whatever the number happens to be to produce the show, we have to go knocking on doors and raising that capital. So how do we do that when we're competing against the odds, when there's no investment incentives to encourage people to invest? So we're at a disadvantage. Put that into the context of our economy and trying to reconstruct our industry, not just for the next 2 or 3 years, but for the next 40 years or 50 years, or a planning stage for a major musical or play that takes between the next 2 and 5 years of planning. It makes it very difficult. I think so. That's my first point. My second point is that we, in the not-for-profit sector, I think it's alarming what's happening in the United States with the impact of the economic
right. That's
the economic situation, the impact that's happening in the not-for-profit sector. Subscription audiences are fallen. Almost every not-for-profit company in the United States have reduced its staffing levels. They've reduced their seasons or had to modify their seasons. Many have had to, a number have closed in part this year. That's affecting a number of playwrights, actors, the food chain to Broadway and beyond for product and development. So how does that impact Australia? We know that subscription audiences in Australia have fallen since COVID. We know consumer behavior has radically changed. Yet, looking at a large number of not-for-profit subscription programs for 2024, they are still programming like pre-COVID. If I look, you just pick a major company, there are so many plays that in their season, and I have to ask the question: do audiences want to see that many plays in that particular subscription season? And my second follow-on question is: are those companies producing to subsidy or as opposed to starting to produce for success and commercial success?
Right.
If with our not-for-profit companies are very good at creating a number of very commercially successful plays and properties, but they have no life of bringing in new audiences because they got a 5-week season and then they're closed. So if your audience is declining and you're trying to build up audiences, what you need to have some success. So I think the not-for-profit model needs to be rethought because because unless the model starts changing, all they're going to be asking for is more money for continual losses.
And the question I wanted to kind of jump in on that was, do you find that when it comes to a lot of those things you were saying about the scheduling of the shows, brand new musicals versus established products, do you feel like there's an inequality in the two, or do they impact on each other at all?
Well, I was making a clear distinction between the not-for-profit and the commercial sector, not genre types.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And I think I don't care about genre. I think if you're looking at the Australian landscape, I think that I want to avoid a crisis in the Australian landscape of companies collapsing or going under. And I think unless there's a change in thinking of a number of not-for-profit companies quickly, we may see some disappear because can they keep producing the volume of plays in a declining subscription market?
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. It's a fair question.
It's also, though, about what is it that's going to continue to get new audiences in the door. And that is obviously part of what Rodney's saying, is that, in general, it might be a general statement, and I'm sure lots of people want to contest it, but certainly in the commercial landscape, it's very difficult to get an audience to come in if it's not an existing brand. And you have to be prepared to really go out on a limb, as Rodney did with Come From Away that wasn't known in Australia, as we did with Six. There's lots of shows that lots of people do that are not known brands. And Australian audiences, I mean, people often ask, me, us, the industry, why are we not producing more brand new Australian works commercially? And my answer is, if the Australian public would come in their droves and buy tickets to see it, then we'd be producing it. It's really difficult to have people take the risk, and more, and I mean a risk as in risking their ticket money. At the moment, especially since COVID, they want a known brand, they want to be entertained, they want to have a good time. Things that have been presented which are more challenging have not necessarily enjoyed the same rewards post-COVID because people just want to go and have a good time, So, we are really slaves of the market in many ways as well. And I guess the hard thing for a subsidized company is they have mandates from the government to do X. They've got a part of their audience wants to see cutting edge, part of their audience wants to see more commercial. They're using more commercial works to fund their cutting edge works. More commercial work starts cutting across the commercial market, or has already for some years now. So, it's a really, I think as Rodney said, I have certainly started talking to people about saying, I think we need to do a deep dive into our industry and where it's going for the next 5 years, because I'm not convinced that it's going to be able to sustain in the current way. And some people just poo-poo that and say, oh, don't be daft, it always goes through waves, this is just another wave. Yeah, maybe they're right, but I'm not necessarily convinced in the same way that Rodney isn't.
Well, I think there's enough evidence coming out of the United
That's right.
States to say this is not just a wave. I mean, the evidence coming out of the United States is pretty clear. This is the greatest, this is the greatest crisis since the Great Depression.
In the arts,
yeah.
And I think we've got to be very vigilant to make sure that we can avoid something similar happening here.
Right.
Now, whilst our subsidy and our funding mechanisms are so different to the United States, when the Sydney Theatre Company posts a surplus of $40,000 after having some sizable hits last year with additional grants from the New South Wales government, that's a pretty devastating result.
Do they fear, Rodney, that if they make too much of a profit, they're going to lose their funding?
Oh, good question.
Well, this is where I think I think you got, are they, this is, I'm not citing the Sydney Theatre Company, because I think this is where I think, are people producing to subsidy, or are they producing to create, in that balanced world, trying to produce? They need to, there's some very commercial shows the Sydney, companies create, but they don't have a life. There's nowhere for them to transfer anymore.
Yeah, because I think that's a good thing as well. Like the whole transfer, where do they exist? And I think it comes back to what you said, they do it for 5 weeks and then it's done. And I think as well, like what you said, if you understand how the West End, if you go to the West End and you go to Broadway and you see how these places run, literally go see 2 shows in a day, 10 shows in a week if you have the money. And if they're struggling, then that's like a big warning. From what I'm hearing anyway, for us as Australia, because obviously we don't have anywhere near that level established.
Well, we don't have that level of population, and we certainly don't have that level of theatres to populate. But the amount of stuff is much less. It's a very interesting time, as Rodney said. It's a very interesting time, and yes, you can just carry on and pretend everything's fine and keep doing what we do. But, it is such a small ecosystem, the entertainment and arts market and group of companies, that we all get affected in a great way. And because we are based on discretionary income, anything that starts squeezing the pocket starts squeezing our business. And, that eventually has to have an outcome attached to it, in terms of the scale of production or the quality of production or the frequency of productions, etc. And that in turn then can bring the market down a bit, So I mean, it's an interesting time, and someone would say, "Oh, look at all the shows." I mean, I have this argument all the time. They say, "That's crazy. Look at all the shows that are being produced. There's tons of them. It must be a burgeoning market." And you'll go, the reason why there are so many shows being produced, for 2 reasons. One, we don't have many shows that can run like a year anymore, and they used to. So, you might have 2 shows in the country running for a year at a time. That sucks up a year of a theatre. Whereas if all the time you're only running for 10 weeks or 12 weeks or something like that, then you can fit several of those in a year. That means they're also going to be selling tickets one on top of the other. They're going to be advertising one on top of the other. And that's just one venue. There's not a lot of big commercial product that we can all see out there for Australia at the moment. I mean, when you say, what would you like to bring? I mean, there's a lot of shows that exist but aren't necessarily right for the Australian marketplace. And there's a lot
Yeah,
of
that's
shows
true.
that exist and don't make money. Well, that's not a good place. When you live in a country that aren't brought up on the arts and entertainment and culture in quite the same way that the UK and even the US are. There's much more arts and entertainment happens in schools and trips to theatres in schools from a very young age, and that starts to form the habit. And that happens overseas much more than it does here. So
Definitely.
I think, there's lots of repeat shows going on. There's lots of shorter seasons going on. And that's all reflective of this kind of interesting time we're in. It's not because the industry is blooming.
But what we do have is, we're at an incredibly fortunate, right now we're in a good point in time where you have a group of practitioners and theatre makers that want to expand the business. That probably is the highest level of practitioners in the country's history.
And also who've been around the longest, Rodney.
So that's good. And you have a lot of new, you have such a breadth of new Australian work happening, from our First Nations work to new musicals being done right across the not-for-profit sector, which is great. So this is, this is all very exciting stuff. But what we've got to do is work out how we develop new audiences.
That's right.
And
how
do you develop new audiences is creating hits and having spaces for people to see those hits. So that's either more infrastructure, which is not going to happen overnight, or 14 years. So so it's more infrastructure, or you start having to change the model for doing 10 shows in a year to allow some space to do 7 shows in a year, hoping that one of your successful shows will run the extra 3 weeks. That word of mouth in the first 5 weeks may actually bring people in for the last 3 weeks and turn it into a hit. And if it doesn't work, do some maintenance on the theatre that you've been wanting to do for 5 years. But that's where I argue, are we, in the not-for-profit sector, are we producing for subsidy, or do we need to redefine? We need a balance we need a greater balance.
Well, I'm just very conscious of time that I need to wrap up here soon. So I'd love to get your final, your final thoughts on, if you could summarize what we talked about today, what's one important thing that you'd love the listeners to leave with?
Well, I think as Rodney said, and Rodney and I are on the same page. From a government perspective, the first most critical thing is finding a way to get investors interested in the Australian market again. So that's part of it, and that comes down to product, but also, more importantly, incentives, as Rodney said. I think as for listeners, I would have thought that a lot of your listeners are arts-orientated and entertainment-orientated listeners.
Yes.
So for that, I would like to thank them for being so and stay with us, because there's lots of good things to come. It's just a challenging time. And I think that the most important thing I always want people to know is, for every 30 people they see on stage in a cast, or whether it's 6 or 10 or 12, there's like 5 times that many out the back. It takes about 150 people in a building on a day to put on a performance, and of a musical, major musical, and people have no concept of that. So they'll often say, "Blimey, why are the tickets so expensive?" And I go, well, we employ 150 people. We have to play to 16,000 people a week if you're in a 2,000-seat theatre. And by the way, we only start paying the bills at the very final top-up of those theatres There's a lot of labor, and you can't cut costs on labor. So, it's a high risk industry that needs audiences to keep coming for it to continue to exist.
Love it. Excellent. Thank you. And Rodney?
I'm just going to reiterate what Louise has said. I think this is I'm just going to add, this is a time of great opportunity, but it's a time where we need to embrace a sense of reconstruction. You've had the Australia Council reconstruct itself under the federal government. I think the not-for-profit sector should look how it operates, and I think the commercial sector needs to look how it operates. I think the Sydney commercial operators, those who operate commercially, should form a peer group to lobby for Sydney, because I think that would be a much more effective means of getting policy up with government. I don't think it can be done nationally. I don't think it's worked successfully to date. I think the challenges in Sydney are very different to those in Melbourne. I think we need to recognise that. I think Sydney has a number of challenges that are unique to the city. And I think we have a government, at both levels that are prepared to listen, but I think it needs to be fed. And I think that's, it's, how do we do that is really the answer we need to find.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for both jumping on, giving us your time today. That was a rich discussion that I'm sure is going to leave a lot of people with a lot to think about, and hopefully we can see more positives moving forward. So, Louise, Rodney, thank you so much again for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
A massive thank you once again to Rodney Rigby and Louise Withers for being our special guests on this week's episode. If you found this conversation insightful or raises more questions for you, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us here at Theatre Thoughts, Theatre Thoughts AUS, or our podcast channel at ttpod_official, or by following the links in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Echidna Audio. Follow them on Instagram at Echidna Audio for all their audio services. Once again, if you enjoyed our podcast, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and head to the link in this episode's description for our Instagram account, TikTok, YouTube, and Patreon. My name's Justin Clarke, and I'll see you next time here on the Theatre Thoughts podcast.
Disney's Aladdin on Broadway is among the longest-running shows in Broadway history. But did you know that it almost never came to be?
We walked out of Seattle thinking, okay, we don't have it. We have a lot of work to do.
But against tremendous odds, in March of 2024, they celebrated 10 years on Broadway.
Disney did a great job because they really took the notes.
Go behind the magic and listen to this never-before-heard story, the magical making of Disney's Aladdin on Broadway. Available everywhere you can get your podcasts.
Can you identify an Elphaba just from her defying gravity war cry?
Can you name every actress in the Wicked to Waitress pipeline?
Or does the phrase witch switch mean anything to you?
Well then, good news! My name's Quincy.
And my name's Kevin.
And we're the hosts of Sentimental Men.
We're here to talk,
and maybe scream,
about our favorite women in musical theater, the witches of Wicked. So if spending a Friday night in a no-good deed rabbit hole on YouTube sounds like your idea of a good time, then Sentimental Men is the podcast for you.
And with guests like Jessica Vosk, Lucy Jones, and Stephanie J. Block, chances are we've already got an episode with your favorite Elphaba.
Or Glinda, like Laura Bell Bundy, Brittany Johnson, and Mackenzie Kurtz.
So pause your riff compilations, put down your copy of The Grimmery, and give Sentimental Men a listen.
You can find us on the Broadway Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.